I've worked with a number of boards of directors in my time, and I'm hoping that I'm going to have a better experience in the US than I did in the UK.
There are inherent tensions between boards of directors and development directors. And it's just helpful to know that that's just the way it is. That's the territory.
There is an interesting phenomenon that I came across in England that I was very surprised by, in that you get some people on boards who have spent years and years in for-profits. They've been on corporate boards. They are top of their field in business. Why do they leave their business sensibilities at the door when they walk through the door to the boardroom? They get involved in nitty-gritty stuff that they shouldn't be involved in. They don't have the trust in the staff to get the job done.
You have different mandates, and they're not always, what the development director is dealing with isn't and doesn't really need to be completely understood by the board of directors. And the board of directors, they're charged with things that the development director doesn't have to shoulder as well. So they have a different view, development folks, development shop, board of directors, they have a different view of the same animal. They're seeing slightly different things.
You need to have that separation. You need to know that, as a board member, I can't really get involved into day-to-day nitty-gritty stuff. That's not my role. And as a staff member, you need to remember that these people are actually giving their time. That they are a volunteer at the end of the day. So there's got to be respect on both sides.
The board has to juggle often many challenging things around governance and budget. And the more challenge they have around the operating budget, they're trying to figure out what are the revenue streams, what are our real costs, how do we keep our doors open, how do we sustain the organization, how do we move forward. That can be quite challenging for nonprofits. Often it's a challenging just business as usual, but if you need to expand your programs or do a capital expansion, expand your staff, it can be very tense, and it usually is for most nonprofits.
I think that something that's been missing is open communication and training. I like to be able to develop a relationship with a board that says, this is what I hope to achieve as a development director, and I hope we can find a way of working together to achieve that. I know why you're here, because you're passionate about the disease, and I hope that we can find a way of working together so that we can bolster each other up and use your skills and use whatever time you have. And I think that there has to be a way of having communication to say that if there's something that is worrying you, raise it. Don't wait for a board meeting. Call the executive director, call the development director and say, I've been thinking about this, and do you mind if we take a few minutes to talk it through? Because you've got open lines there. It might raise something that, you can't see the forest for the trees sometimes. Somebody, as an outsider and a member of the board, isn't as involved in the day-to-day operation. So they're actually in a really good place. They've got that helicopter view. It's easier to pick out key issues and factors when you've got a little bit more of an objective view. And if the development staff and the executive director can be open to the intent behind the contact, because not everybody is a communication expert, and we all have pressures. And if somebody cares that much that they just have to have a word with the ED, it might come across as, a bit aggressive, because they're just short on time. They've got all these pressures going on, but they also want to make contact with the ED and say, this is something I've been thinking about. If we can't talk about it now, let's find another time. So I think staff need to be aware that the intent behind the contact is always good and positive, even though the actual contact itself might ruffle a few feathers. And that's part of the problem of working with boards. You don't see them often enough to be able to get to know them well enough. So, there has to be a bit of forgiveness on both parts.
The tension, if you can take it out of the people out of it and just look at it, is that natural tension between what we need and what's feasible, reasonable, and achievable. And I think that's where the tension occurs between development and the board. The board really has to be holding up what is needed. The development director really has to hold the ground of, but this is what's feasible, reasonable, and achievable. Because you don't want to start, as a development director, drifting into the land of, we never achieve our goals because they're always too large, too ambitious for really the carrying capacity of the organization.
I would like to see a little bit more frequent discussion between boards and staff, and some facilitation in terms of, really approaching strategic questions and saying, we've got all these brilliant minds around the table, why don't we use them? So, if one of our strategic objectives is to increase the level of awareness in our community, then yeah, we have experience in the staff of how we can do that. But one of the advantages of boards is, we hope that they have lots of contacts and that they can lever those contacts to be able to do more for us. So that's one of my hopes for the future.
My advice is you have to sit down and have a little chat with yourself. If you want to be a development director or a major gift officer or someone who just has more responsibility, you want to step up that professional ladder, you have to sit down and decide, am I going to whine about what's hard? Because the hard stuff is never going to go completely away. It's just going to wear a new costume every year and come to the ball looking a little different, but it's going to show up. Do I want to just kind of whine about that and be oppressed and worried? Or do I want to look at this as the crucible of my leadership? Maybe that's a little grandiose, but maybe it's not. It's like, I'm thinking of, for a while I used to have on my, the floating screensaver on my computer. Well, what would a leader do? Just so I could be reminded of that. It's like, well, man, I know exactly what a whiner would do in this situation, and I'm loaded to whine. But what would a leader do? What's the call to leadership here? It may be something very small. It could be something very large. But those, because there's all that natural tension in there, and it will never be fully resolved, you have many opportunities in your career to respond as a leader.